We got a fun show today, though. This is episode 2 of our draft series that we're starting. We're going to talk about the sort of recent run of quote-unquote toolsy quarterbacks that have worked out or haven't worked out. We're going to talk about the instant wide receiver success we've seen in the last few years. These guys stepping in, being dominant right away. We're going to build a dream wide receiver prospect like we did for quarterbacks last week with Mike. And then we're going to talk a little bit about dream scenarios for people picking in the top 10. So
let's do it.
Let's fire this right up. What's our first one? Let's talk about these toolsy quarterbacks, because this is fascinating to me. We've obviously gone on a run recently of a lot of these guys that we would talk about as tools types of prospects working out. Like the strike rate on these guys has been pretty good recently, to the point where there was a run of 3 or 4 years where Chris Sims looked like he had the answer to quarterback scouting because Chris Sims likes toolsy quarterbacks.
Right.
And they've just been working out for a while.
Right.
So that looked great. And we've, when you look at the last few draft class, I think there's a bunch of guys that kind of fit into the category of these tools types players. And why that's interesting is because I think there's 2 of them this year in particular that are going to be relevant when we're talking about that. Will Levis from Kentucky and Anthony Richardson from Florida for different reasons. But those are the 2 guys, particularly when you're comparing them to the Bryce Youngs of the world, who, like, his only flaw essentially is guy's really small.
Right.
So when you're comparing them to those 2 guys, like, the tools I think are going to start to be relevant. But when you start looking at the recent draft classes, we've got, I would say Zach Wilson falls into the tools category, even if size wasn't there. But arm was a big selling point for him. And mobility was as well, even though that was probably either oversold.
Arm was the big one.
Yes.
Arm was the big one for most.
Justin Fields obviously 100%. Was a toolsy type of quarterback. Trey Lance, huge toolsy type of quarterback.
Right.
Justin Herbert, certainly relative to Joe Burrow and to Tua, was the toolsy type of quarterback. Jalen Hurts, a little bit later in that same draft class.
Yeah.
Jordan Love as well, I think, was more of a toolsy type of quarterback. Then you got Daniel Jones from that 2019 draft class, I think was quite toolsy.
Turned out to be a little toolsy, didn't he?
Well, certainly arm, again, was always a big thing about him. I don't think anyone really understood, for some reason, and even now I don't understand it, how he's so successful running the ball. But toolsy. 2018, Josh Allen, obviously.
The king.
The prototype.
The king.
Toolsy quarterback.
Yes.
Lamar Jackson as well, just because of the freakish athleticism. The arm is obviously very different, but it falls into that category as well. And then you go back to 2017 and you get, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, I think to a degree. Trubisky was probably quite a toolsy quarterback.
I'd consider him that.
Didn't work out. Deshaun Kaiser was certainly a toolsy quarterback. Definitely didn't work out.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
So that's kind of our run over the last sort of 5 years of quarterbacks and how they've worked out or not. I didn't put Kyler in there on the basis that, big arm, athletic. But
right. Small dude.
I don't think you can be toolsy if you're 5'6".
No, yeah, I think you can be toolsy.
Really?
Yeah. But I think kind of what you're talking about there, and as you list off a lot of those quarterbacks, there's a different varying degree. Like when you brought up Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen back to back, if you were to just kind of blanketly say toolsy quarterbacks, both of them are right there. Lamar's got great arm strength. Lamar's got fantastic mobility. The difference was, and the reason why I feel like Lamar didn't get necessarily that like toolsy kind of label isn't because he didn't have them, but it's because Lamar ran a pro-style offense when he was at Louisville, right? He won a Heisman Trophy. Like, we had already seen the success of this dude. So I feel as though we don't often categorize quarterbacks as toolsy if they've almost already proven the tools. We just call them good.
Yeah.
Josh Allen's the king of was just tools coming out of Wyoming. That was it. It was literally just flashes. And he's the one that everybody always goes to. Like, he's the example that people use for Will Levis, for Anthony Richardson, where you go, yeah, but look what it could be. So I just, when you're kind of like listing off those quarterbacks and, you bring up the Kyler thing, it's like, is he toolsy? Yeah, Kyler does have tools. He has a big arm. He has the mobility. That's technically what you would categorize as guys who get that label. But Kyler also already showed it all in college. Yeah. So it's almost just like, no, this is kind of just who he is.
There's an implied deficiency when you're talking about toolsy quarterbacks, right?
Yes.
Like, you can't. So can you be a toolsy quarterback and go number 1 overall? Probably not, right? Because you would just be the best quarterback. You wouldn't. Nobody would be saying this is a Toolsy type of quarterback. It would just be like he's just a good QB.
Well, the Browns almost did pick Josh Allen.
True.
They almost did pick Josh Allen. So we almost had that example right there of like a Toolsy guy potentially going number one. But I do agree with what you're saying. Normally, when we use this label for quarterbacks, we're often talking about guys who have not achieved their potential yet. Because of the guys with the tools who have already become good, we just simply call them good. Like what you said, the guys who go number one overall, you just call them good quarterbacks.
The analogy I used at the time for Josh Allen is we called him an IKEA quarterback, right? Because
some assembly required.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's a box, and all the stuff you need for the thing, whatever it is in the box.
Yeah, sure.
But you have to put it together.
Sure.
And maybe somebody threw away the instruction manual, so you just got to figure it out. But like, that's what he is. He's just like a box of bits. Right? Like the arm is there, the size is there, the processing ability is there somewhere. Like it's all in there, but you have to figure out how to take this box, get all the bits out and put it together and assemble NFL quarterback.
Well, as somebody who put together a bed frame a couple weeks ago.
Bed frame.
Let me tell you, I think I know exactly how to make the most out of these quarterbacks that we're going to talk about here on today's show.
Mm-hmm. Bed frame feels like quite a low-hanging fruit of the IKEA hierarchy.
Don't take this away from me.
Okay.
Come on.
All right.
It took me like 2 hours to still do it. I'm proud of it. The bed has not caved in.
Well, that's a good start.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good start. So let's move this forward to this year because Will Levis, the Kentucky quarterback, and Anthony Richardson, the Florida quarterback. Those are the two guys that we're going to be talking about the most as Toolsy types of quarterbacks. I want to start with Levis because it feels like he has the highest ceiling in terms of where he can go in this draft, not where they can be in 2 years' time, but where, like, if a team falls in love with Will Levis, how high could he actually end up getting taken?
Top five. I mean, legitimately, it feels like he's got that kind of hype. Now, it was a little crazy when we started to get those whispers a couple of months ago that Will Levis could potentially be picked in this range, but it seems like there's a lot of mock drafts recently that have him in the top 10, and it feels like we're just kind of all accepting that. And we've seen this happen, I think, in drafts past. Shoot, you go to last year, I know it wasn't the quarterback position, but I think if you asked a lot of people what they thought of Trayvon Walker, let's say in January, everybody would have been like, yeah, really good athlete, uniquely built alien type of athlete. Guy has a lot of tools, but would probably be back end of the first round, early second round kind of a player. You'd probably settle in on back end of the first round just because you don't let guys that are that freakishly athletic get out of the first round. All of a sudden, he's going number one overall. And we just like slowly got to this point where you had to accept that.
We were at the combine, and the discussion was Aiden Hutchinson versus Evan Neal. It wasn't Trayvon Walker.
Right. And if you got to April and you were doing a mock draft that didn't have Trayvon Walker number one, it was pointless just because we got to that point. Now, a lot of people are arguing kind of pros and cons with Will Levis, and they're like, oh, you can't. I mean, I'm not going to put him in my first round mock draft. And it's like, all right, guys, depending on what you're doing the mock for, if you don't have Will Levis, at least in your top 15, it's probably just going to be wrong because of what the NFL is looking with him. Now, when you look at Will Levis, I'm not as big of a Will Levis proponent as Mike is. If Mike was sitting in this chair today, he'd tell you he'd be a little bit more bullish about it. But I do certainly see the highs of Will Levis. Like, the guy does have an unbelievable arm. When we had him on our show not too long ago, he said that he can throw the ball 80 yards. Like, that's the kind of arm that we're talking. We're talking about distance. We're talking about velocity. We're talking about overall arm talent. Totally there with him. The level of quarterbacking when it comes to just like IQ, understanding, wisdom of the position, he doesn't really have that, right? I mean, let's face it. He couldn't beat out Sean Clifford at Penn State. That's why he transferred to Kentucky. Now, I think it was great for him and all around. That first year that he was at Kentucky, he was a first-year starter. So, yeah, he's going to have some lumps that he went against. This past year, dude, he's throwing to nobody.
Right.
There's nobody on Kentucky's offense that's doing anything outside of Will Levis. He was, I can't remember exactly the stat that Mike has, but there is a demanded tight window throw stat that Mike continually references with Will Levis. And the times in which that he was required to make an NFL tight window type of throw because of the lack of separation that his receivers got was so high, so far above what the average is in the NFL and in college football. And it just goes to show there were no easy yards for this guy.
Yeah.
There were no easy throws. Now, that's not to say that he made every throw perfectly, but it is to kind of contextualize why there is an argument for NFL people believing the best is yet to come for Will Levis. They are not judging him this past year at Kentucky saying, that's it. What you see is what you get. We're not going to get better than that. They're simply saying, we see the seeds being planted or roots that could grow from what his talent is and what it could blossom into in the future.
How much do you think the recent run of relative success for those Toolsy quarterbacks helps guys like Levis and Richardson?
Massive. I think it's huge, and especially because we're seeing in today's NFL, even beyond just the quarterback position, so many early contributors, right? We all talk about the value of a rookie contract. We talk about how a quarterback, a franchise quarterback, a good starter on a rookie contract is one of the most valuable things, not just in the NFL, but in sports. We see that across all other positions as well. It feels as though the league is just at a point to where young guys are getting shot, right? We see this in college football as well. These freshmen, these sophomores, they're getting on the field. That's the recruiting pitch to them, and it's happening. And it just feels like overall where football is right now, coaches and teams are okay with starting these guys at a younger age or younger into their rookie deal. So I believe 100% you're correct. The run on success in even if it's sporadic examples goes into that imagination of, okay, but what if this guy is Josh Allen? Like what if this guy does pan out the way? I mean, Brock Purdy's probably an example too, right? Not necessarily a toolsy quarterback. It's not that same kind of player, but you go, damn, if you draft the right guy, you get him in the right system, you give him some confidence, look what happens. He plays well. And I think all of these examples are, whether you want to say positive or negatives, into the imagination of some of these GMs and head coaches that they can get the most out of these guys, not in year 2 and year 3, but in year 1 maybe. So I
also think there are obviously people in the NFL that do value the tools more or as much as anything else. They're really fixated on that kind of thing. And if you're one of those guys, you are going to push guys like Levis and Richardson up your draft board relative to everybody else, because you're going to hate Bryce Young if that's the only thing you love.
Right.
Like if your sole thing is, I need a 6'5", 230-pound guy that can run, you're going to hate Bryce Young because he's 6 foot 190 maybe.
Right.
At the very most generous interpretation. He's probably smaller than that.
Right.
He's tiny. And okay, Stroud is bigger than that, but he's not big. He's much less of a tools guy than somebody like Levis. So if that's the thing you're focused on, you are going to push those guys up relative to the other options.
100%. And I think that's why you get into these debates of why Bryce Young might not be the number 1 overall pick. Right? Because we say to ourselves, well, not every team is going to love Bryce Young. For as incredible as the last 2 years have been for him, we've got some recent examples in the NFL, right? Well, like, look at what has happened with Russell Wilson. I'll just say even over the last couple of years. Russ doesn't like to throw over the middle. And a lot of people wonder, is it because he can't see over the middle? Like, is it because if the pocket is clean and he's staying in the pocket, does he not have a good enough vision over the middle to trust throwing over the middle? Kyler's had the same problem, right? Do you want to go? The worst part, it feels like, for GMs and head coaches is when they can visualize a player's ceiling when it comes to those higher draft picks. If you can visualize a player's ceiling already, I don't want to say deters you from taking a player high, but it might give you a little bit of hesitation. Whereas if you go, yeah, okay, I mean, like Bryce Young's been fantastic. We've seen him. He's been fantastic. But like, is the height going to be an issue in the NFL? Have we seen those issues with smaller quarterbacks? And then you go, but Levis could be different, and you play this little what if game in your head, and I think sometimes it can be very dangerous. I go back to the Family Guy sketch where it's like, sure, yeah, a boat's a boat, but the mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat, and I think that's sometimes the game that these GMs and these head coaches have to play, and some are better at managing that than others.
Definitely. Let's move on to wide receivers.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by this run recently in the last few drafts of how many good wide receivers have entered the league and been good right away. Like, you look at last year's draft class. Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams basically redshirted last year and still somehow managed to look dangerous. Jahan Dotson was way better than I thought he would be. Even Treylon Burks, like, a lot put on his shoulder, but when he was healthy,
he was way better than I thought he was going to be.
Christian Watson didn't do anything for the first half of the season, then really broke out with a ton of touchdowns. Even in the second round, guys like George Pickens, you can go quite deep into this draft. Like Romeo Doubs was the guy getting all the preseason hype, didn't necessarily continue that, but was still dangerous. You go back a year, that's obviously Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Kadarius Toney didn't do anything with the Giants, but now looks devastating in limited action with the Chiefs. Bateman's been injured a lot. Elijah Moore has been that whatever weird thing is going on with the Jets. And then, you go back a year before that, okay, Henry Ruggs obviously is his own case, but Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman. Like, we've had this insane run of a lot of really good wide receivers and a pretty good strike rate. And these guys hitting the ground running like right away. First of all, what do you think is driving that instant success?
I do think that a lot of these wide receivers are a lot more ready for the NFL because college, I feel like over the last couple of years, let's just say over the last 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, has become a lot more pass heavy, right? And I feel like you are seeing more advanced passing attacks in college. Like, you just have a lot of this, whether it's spread concepts, air raids, whatever you want to call it. A lot of these teams, they're living in a lot more 11 personnel, just getting more wide receivers out on the field. There are more wide receivers that are getting more experience on the field than I feel like have been in the past. So this is a building into them getting a ton of experience in college, and when they get to the NFL, it's not like this is all new to them. I feel like they're very used to being the man, like being the go-to guy. So that kind of target share isn't unfamiliar to them. In fact, like, that's probably what they're used to, right? I feel like it would be worse for some of these guys to come into the NFL and it's like, all right, you were used to getting 10 targets a game at Ohio State or USC or Alabama or wherever it was. Now you're getting 1. And I feel like that's more of an adjustment than even getting a full-time load in the NFL is. Not to say there's not a learning curve when you're going up against different defenses, but I just feel like these guys are a lot more ready. And we're seeing it all the way back at the high school level too, right? You've seen the growth of 11-on-11s, these Elite 11 camps, these 7-on-7 camps, and like all this. And what are those doing? Those are developing skill players, particularly wide receivers. So even going back to high school, a lot of how recruiting is done now is much more friendly to developing these skill players to where when they get on campus somewhere, especially a lot of these 4 or 5-star guys, they're expected to be able to play right away, and they can. And then all of a sudden, now you've got these guys who, juniors, might have 3 years of starting experience as like serious skill player guys at legit universities. It's not this 4-star guy who went into a smaller program who just happened to be the best wide receiver there. It's guys from Bama, from Ohio State, from all of these major college football programs. So I think that kind of goes into it. Is just, sure, we're seeing a increase of passing game everywhere, but it's always a trickle up effect. High school gives trends to college, which gives trends to the NFL. And I feel as though we are now at the point to where a lot of those big changes that have been happening in high school with high school offenses and recruiting camps has bled into college and how colleges go about their offenses and how they utilize their star players. Now we're seeing more of those guys ready to contribute early at the NFL level.
It would be really interesting to go back, a number of years and sort of work out what the totality of snaps looks like for a wide receiver by the time they make it to the NFL now versus, 10, 20 years ago. Because with all these spread offenses, like, not only are they giving these guys more opportunities, but there's more wide receivers on the field at the same time, right? So even if you come in and for your first couple of years, freshman, sophomore, even if you're buried on the depth chart behind a couple of superstars that are heading to the NFL from the first round, you can still be the third guy running 25 snaps a game or running 25 routes a game in a way that probably wasn't an option 10, 20 years ago. Like, you would just be sitting on the bench watching this happen.
Right.
And then when that guy leaves, now you get to step up, and that's the first time we get to see if you can even do this anymore. But now those guys can almost apprenticeship from the game. Like, they can actually be running routes, developing, getting coached, presumably during the week, because the tape is still there. Even if you're not getting the ball because it's going to the first round superstar, somebody is still going, okay, here's what you need to work on. This was sloppy. This needs to be fixed, blah, blah, blah. It feels like these guys are reaching the point where by the time they get to the NFL, just the number of snaps they've played, the number of routes they've run is immeasurably more than it was in the past.
They're much more experienced now. Being a rookie does not mean the same thing today, especially for the skill position wide receiver, specifically for this conversation, than it did 10 years ago. It's just not the same conversation.
Right.
I think before, if you weren't a first-round pick wide receiver, it was really hard to be a difference maker early on in your career. Now you got Amon-Ra St. Brown's drafted in the 4th round, and this dude is leading the Lions receiving corps.
Right.
Like he is the main passing weapon that they have, and I just don't think that was ever really a thing. At least to the extent that it is today. I agree with you.
Now, that being said, this does not sound like it is as good a wide receiver class as the last few. So in addition to just I think what we just talked about is absolutely real, and it is becoming easier and easier for wide receivers to enter the NFL and be successful right away. Mm-hmm. I think we've probably also seen a run of 3 or 4 very good wide receiver draft classes.
Yeah, we have. And it's not going to be as strong this year. I think depending on who your wide receiver 1 is, I mean, I think it's probably 3 different players that I've heard a lot. Quentin Johnston's the one from TCU that I hear a ton about being potentially wide receiver 1. Jordan Addison, the former Biletnikoff winner. We talked about this a little bit pre-show. The former Biletnikoff winner who's now at USC, Jordan Addison. He's a lot of people's wide receiver 1 as well. There's some love for Zay Jones from Boston College as a wide receiver 1.
Zay Flowers, right?
He's just, Zay Flowers. Who did I say? Zay Jones? Yeah, okay. Please don't let me mess that up because I'm going to a million times this draft season and I need somebody to beat it out of my head. Zay Flowers, where he's not built like a traditional wide receiver 1, but he gets a lot of production and he has a lot of separation ability, so I know a lot of people like him. But I think for Flowers to even be in the conversation as a potential wide receiver 1 in a class, unfortunately goes to show you where the ceiling of it is, especially compared to last year. I think whoever you have as wide receiver 1 in this year's class is probably wide receiver 6 at best in last year's group.
Now, people that listen to the podcast a lot will be familiar with Steve's model. Are you familiar with the model?
No, other than the hair making him look like a model. That's all I got. Are we talking about something else? Okay.
Steve has been creating his own sort of superstar like infinity gauntlet model that just folds in every piece of information in the known world and tells you whether a player is going to be good or not.
Sure.
So it's really, it's the holy grail of draft scouting.
Okay, great.
And
I'll stop watching tape and I'll just get with him then.
And he's been using this, across the board, every position. This is the model guy. This is not a model guy. The model doesn't like this guy. So he has sent me what is essentially a composite of the consensus board for wide receivers and the model. Right? So top right, the consensus board and the model likes these receivers. So Jordan Addison is there. Jackson Smith-Njigba is there. Josh Downs is there. Then the further left you go, but still up, it's the consensus board loves these guys. Model, not so much. Model doesn't like Quentin Johnston as much. He's middle of the pack for the model. Model doesn't like Zay Flowers even less.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then when you go down, but right, the model likes these guys, but the consensus board does not. So who have we got down here? We've got Kearis Jackson is the furthest guy in that quadrant. And then, bottom left is nobody likes him. Model, or I'm not even going to name those guys. I feel like to me.
Okay.
But the point is, if you're in that quadrant,
sure,
you stink.
I understand.
Everybody thinks you're bad.
Yes.
The model thinks you're bad, and the consensus board thinks you're bad. You have no shot, essentially. So I don't feel it's appropriate to name those people.
It's good on you.
Particularly because I yet don't know whether they're supposed to be good or not. So
right. It's right.
Literally taking a dump over some guy that's been told you're an undrafted free agent at best, sir. You might as well just get your education and then start sending some applications out.
Hey, education's never a bad thing.
No, it's fine. I'm just saying, those are not people you want to dump on a podcast. But anyway, I just think it's fascinating that those two guys, Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston, the model, we've yet to, really, I think, play out the efficacy of the model. But model doesn't like those guys as much as the rest.
It's, again, like it's going to be a polarizing class in that regard, just because the league is so starving for passing game playmakers every year. We see so many come through, and yet every year there's always teams that could desperately use another playmaker. The New York Giants, right? The Baltimore Ravens, even the Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Cowboys, right? Like these are just teams that I just thought of at the top of my head where it's like, wide receiver. These teams need go-to wide receivers in the passing game. But this class, does it warrant a guy being a really high first-round pick in that regard? I don't know.
Doesn't this feel a little bit like last year, though, where there was a lot of conversation last year of there's no Jamar Chase in this draft, right? Which I think after a year is probably true. That being said, I mean, Garrett Wilson was pretty useful.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I think that's true. I'm not sure that Garrett Wilson has a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase type of ceiling to his game. But did it matter? Like, what he was able to do was still more than good enough for a team that was in need of wide receiver help.
I was going to say, man, you put Garrett Wilson either on another team or you just put him with a different quarterback, and I think that we're talking about a phenomenal year.
Oh, I agree.
He had a good year anyways, but just to go to your point, like if anybody was saying...
I was saying that, but like statistically, at one point, certainly very close to the end of the season, if you just stripped out non-Zach Wilson games, like he was on pace for a Jamar Chase season.
Right.
But I still think that like there's a difference. As much as I love Garrett Wilson, like he was my number one.
Everyone's still picking Jamar Chase over
he was my
Wilson.
number one receiver in that draft class. Yeah. I still think that like there are things Chase can do that he can't.
I think that Wilson had a phenomenal year, obviously, but I don't think anybody's taking him over Jamar Chase. Okay.
So, but my point being, like that was we heard a lot of that a year ago. You know what I mean? Like there's no Jamar Chase.
It's different this year. To I guess I see the conversation that you're kind of bringing up. It's definitely different. Right. Like last year, I think there were a lot of people that were going, "Oh, there's no all-pro rookie wide receivers," and that's like a crazy high bar to say.
Nobody's going to break the record this year.
Right. This year, it's different. This year, the bar is a lot lower for this wide receiver class.
So let's move and let's build what a perfect receiver prospect looks like. We did this with quarterbacks.
Okay.
I thought it was kind of fun. So we've broken down our wide receiver prospect into 6 separate categories. I'm going to give you the NFL prototype for each one, and then you can tell me who that is in this draft class. So we've got hands, route running, speed, size and frame, how he does at the catch point, and then yards after the catch. I think there's a few different sort of nuanced bits that you could maybe fold into different categories or give them their own category by themselves. But I think broadly speaking, those are the 6.
Okay.
So NFL prototypes for each one of those things. Hands, I think, has to be DeAndre Nuke Hopkins. I maybe you can argue a couple of other guys, but I think Nuke is the guy with the best hands.
I think I would agree with you. Maybe there wasn't as many highlights this year for him that people can point to, but the dude's insane. I mean, very few wide receivers can make the most out of their catch radius. We all love to talk about catch radius, right? We love to talk about how long's the wingspan, and we go, ooh, yeah, but the potential catch radius. Like, all right, if we're being honest, when you watch the tape, do they actually get the most out of the catch radius? Because if they don't, like Mike Evans, for example. Mike Evans, I think, does a good job sometimes with the catch radius. Like sometimes we've seen Mike Evans sky for catches and fully extend the hands, and like he has that potential. But there's a lot of times when Mike Evans will let catches come into his chest, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, the catch radius doesn't really matter at that point. Nuke not only has phenomenal hand-eye coordination, he does, I think, an excellent job of always making the most out of his catch radius, which goes into it too.
Yeah, let me run through the rest. We've got route running. I've got Devontae Adams.
I
think you can make an argument for a couple of other guys, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, but I think Devontae Adams is the best composite of all of that.
Only one I'd say is Kupp.
Yeah. Speed, it's Tyreek Hill. There is no other answer to that. It is Tyreek Hill, the end of the conversation. Size and frame, I went with DK Metcalf. I think you could make a good argument as well for A.J. Brown, fellow teammates. But I think Metcalf's he's the guy that's just so utterly physically freaky. You know, he's the closest guy now to what used to be Julio Jones and then what used to be Megatron and Randy Moss. And
right.
That, I think, is DK Metcalf right now.
Yeah.
Catch point, I went with George Pickens. I think you can – DeAndre Hopkins is in that conversation again, but Pickens is so good with the ball in the air. And I think probably the best guy in the league already after just 1 year. And then yards after the catch, I went with Debo. Different, I mean, very unique. You can't do that. Unique wide receiver. But just give that guy the ball, stand back.
You can't say unique?
You can't modify unique. Unique means one of a kind.
So
sure. One of a kind.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
It's just bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
No, it's good. You caught yourself. That's
I know.
Good.
What only after I'd said it, and therefore it looks stupid anyway. But yeah, like Debo, you give him the ball, you stand back, you watch. It's different. Nobody else can do that.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to think in my head. The only one that I would really argue with route running would be Cooper Kupp, but I think you have to give it to Devontae Adams. I said this a couple of weeks ago. there are other wide receivers who maybe you could put the value on it being higher. Like, for example, like people look at Tyreek Hill's speed and what kind of a weapon that is with and without the ball and say that's the most impactful, valuable wide receiver in the NFL.
Sure.
And I would understand that argument. When it comes to mastery of the position, I would tell you that there's nobody better than Devontae Adams.
Yeah,
I would tell you that he is the master of the wide receiver position in the NFL. So the only one that I would argue with Cooper Kupp, with that one, would be Cooper Kupp. Speed, there's no debate with Tyreek Hill. What were the other ones?
Size and frame.
DK, I mean, again, Mike Evans is probably up there, but he doesn't use it as consistently as DK does. So I agree with that one, especially with the size and strength combination of what DK is. Who's catch point?
George Pickens.
Oh man, this makes my heart so happy because I feel like I was carrying the flag for George Pickens a lot last offseason. I had him at wide receiver 1 at one point.
Wow.
I had him at wide receiver 1, I think, at the beginning of January, and then I went back and I ended up having Drake London and Jamison Williams above him, so I ended up with Pickens as wide receiver 3. But even I am shocked at just how continually dominant he has been going to the NFL level, mainly as a contested catch wide receiver. He was nuts. And I think people in the chat are probably going to freak out about you having a rookie as the best contested catch wide receiver.
Don't care.
But the thing is that if he's not 1,
right,
he's like top 3 already. What he was able to do this last year, just the contested catch percentage, I feel like was insane for him.
68% of contested catches.
It's
last
stupid.
year. If you're above 50, you're doing well. 68 is nuts.
Stupid, just absolutely stupid. And then yards after catch, Debo. I can't argue that. Who else am I going to go with?
I mean,
there's a lot of good yards after catch wide receivers in the NFL. So this sounds insulting.
Yeah.
Even Cooper Kupp, phenomenal. Justin Jefferson, phenomenal. Stephon Diggs could be fantastic as well. But Debo is different.
The only thing that's slightly weird about it is because he's such a strange positionless type of player, so many of his yards after the catch plays are not like conventional wide receiver plays. You know what I mean? They sort of specifically manufacture yards after the catch touches because he's so good. But it's like,
I don't think that's a negative on him.
I don't think it's a negative, but what I'm saying is, like, how many other receivers maybe would be able to do some more special things after the catch if they got given those kinds of shots?
Sure.
Like I think Tyreek Hill is one of the best run after the catch receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah.
But he doesn't necessarily get as many of those opportunities.
A.J. Brown's also phenomenal after the catch.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Garrett Wilson was incredibly good after the catch.
Well, it's because he's so quick.
Yeah.
Right. Just he gets that separation, creates the throwing window, and boom, he's off to the races. Like it feels insulting that we don't have A.J. Brown on here, but he's within the conversation of a couple of these categories.
Yeah.
I just didn't. Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I'd put him.
And there's something to that. Like the perfect wide receiver is the composite of this. It's not each individual one. So if you're the second best guy in all these, you're probably the best guy that the league has seen for quite a number of years.
Right.
All right, give me the what does the wide receiver draft class look like for each of these?
Okay, do you want me to run down each of them and explain a little bit of it as I kind of go on, or do you want me to just say all of them and then we can touch on it after?
Yeah, let's give me each guy and then give me a sort of this is him and why.
Okay, all right. So I can do that. Hands, Parker Washington from Penn State. I seem to be like the number one Parker Washington fan in the draft community right now. I think he's fantastic. He is a smaller guy. I believe he's right around 6 feet, maybe a little bit less than that, but he's a powerful dude. He's over 200 pounds, and if you're playing him in this slot, he's like a power slot kind of a player, but he plays on the outside as well. The thing that impressed me the most with him is he is consistently a hands catcher. The hands are always out and extended to go get the ball. Obviously, there's times when the situation calls for him corralling it into his chest, but most of the time, if he has the opportunity to extend for it and make the most of whatever his catch radius is, which that could be short, intermediate, deep down the field, I've seen it all from him. He extends the hands, and he is consistently going out to get the ball and attacking the ball and doing it very, very well. His catchable passes caught percentage, I said that right, I think, over 90% this year, which is good. That's where you want to be. You want to be over 90%. He didn't have a ton of contested catch opportunities, but he was at 71% on the season. The guy has an extremely low drop rate, an extremely high contested catch percentage, and an extremely high just overall catch percentage. So for hands, I think that he's the guy that I point to, somebody who I really like in this class.
Again, don't know if you put any stock in it or not, but the model likes him a lot.
Let's go, Steve! I always believed in your work, Steve.
He's number 2, maybe, in the model? 2 or 3? I can't line those dots up properly off eyeballing it. Yeah, so there you go.
I knew you were a smart guy, Steve. Okay, next, route running. I think a lot of people would expect two names here. And the name that I'm going to say is neither of those two. I think a lot of people would expect Josh Downs, who is a slot machine. Just realized that saying those words mean something different, like an actual slot machine. But he is a slot receiver machine in the UNC offense. Good route runner, good yards after the catch guy. Or Ohio State's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is also a very savvy route runner. My choice here is Charlie Jones, the wide receiver from Purdue. Now, Charlie Jones has an extremely interesting journey. This is another guy, not a big dude. He's not going to be a star-studded guy. He's 6 feet tall, about 190 pounds. Started his career at Buffalo. Okay, Buffalo University. Didn't really get on the field much. Played special teams early. Kind of played a little bit the next year, but he was like, look, I had dreams of playing in the Big Ten. Ends up transferring to Iowa. Is a walk-on at Iowa. Makes the team, again, plays special teams for him. Finally gets involved in the offense his 4th year, but again, barely. They barely used him. Ends up transferring to Purdue. This past year with Aiden O'Connell, he had like 1,300 receiving yards, 12 touchdowns. I mean, he was an absolute monster. And the reason why is because this dude has gone to work on his craft. And when it comes to the releases that he has at the line of scrimmage, setting guys up to open their shoulders and hips and then attack them the other way, going after blind spots, in routes, out routes, slants, mesh, skinny posts, fade routes, comebacks. This dude does it all. His route tree is incredibly diverse. He knows how to get off the line of scrimmage. He knows how to beat press. The footwork's fantastic. He is, to me, the best route runner in this class. Now, I don't know how high he's going to get drafted. I don't know where people are going to take him, but that is where my mind went. And I went back and I specifically, in preparing for this podcast, I was like, am I crazy if I put Charlie Jones here? And I sure as hell, I went back and I watched Jackson Smith-Njigba. I watched Josh Downs. I watched a couple of other slot receivers. I watched Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State, who I think is a good route runner for a bigger wide receiver. And then I watched Jones, and I'm like, this dude's feet are better. This dude's releases are better. This dude's how he sets up cornerbacks. He understands things so well. There's no route, whether turning in or out or whatever. He just knows how to do it all. So he is my route running champ in this class.
All right. What do we got for speed?
Speed. Jalen Hyatt. It has to be Jalen Hyatt. Tennessee's Jalen Hyatt. Now, I will say, Josh Heupel, their head coach, does a phenomenal job of scheming him to get up the most out of his speed. They play a lot of their wide receivers in these stack alignments, so it's almost a little bit of like a mini version of, you know how the Canadian Football League wide receivers can get a head start, and then you just start running? Well, they will play their guys in really deep stacked alignments on top of each other. So one wide receiver's on the line of scrimmage, the other one is behind them about 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, yards. So the guy on the line of scrimmage is taking up the player with press coverage, and the other player behind them gets to get a head start before he even reaches the line of scrimmage and can even get into the contact window with whoever is playing corner up against them. At that point, Jalen Hyatt is so damn fast that if you had anybody standing on the line of scrimmage while he had a head start, goodbye, it's over. It's not even close. So the speed in which this guy has is such a weapon, and Tennessee put that on display. There's not a ton of elite athletes in this class. There's not.
Okay.
But I think Jalen Hyatt, deep speed, he's the guy that you would want in that regard.
Okay. He is approaching the Quentin Johnston area of the model.
Okay.
You know, where the consensus loves him. The model, not so much.
He is, I will tell you, and a lot of people are worried about him because he is just a speed guy. Like, he is somebody who you were either running a go, a comeback, a post, or maybe a deep dig route over the middle. There's not a lot of versatility to his route running right now. There's just not. So I think he's very limited in his production and what he was asked to do at Tennessee. He was just put in a really good place to make the most out of the thing he does that he has that is very elite.
So size and frame. Who's our DK?
Size and frame, don't say who's our DK, because catch point is a little bit different than that. I think the guy I have for catch point's a little bit closer to that, but I did go Quentin Johnston for size and frame, just because of the players that certainly are going to be picked high in this class. He stands out literally because he is bigger, because he is a good athlete at his size. You get guys like Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, a lot of these other guys who might be picked in the top 50 or around the top 50. They don't even come close to having the size and the frame that Quentin Johnston does. So it feels like if you're going to take a bet on one of those guys in this class, it would be him. Though the production isn't fully there for him, I still think he's a really good athlete for a player his size. I think there is some route running versatility and potential that hasn't even really been asked of him yet, that he could be even better at in the NFL. And I do think that he has shown, maybe not as consistent as you want, but some good contested catches and making the most out of his frame, and especially because he's a guy who I think is going to test well explosively with the jumps. So I think that goes into it too.
What do you think he's going to run?
I would love for Quentin Johnson to run like just high 4.4s.
High 4.4s.
Like, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Anything in the 4.4s for Quentin Johnson, I'm good with.
I think 4.4 is very, very likely.
You think? Yeah. Like flat? I'd love that.
I could see 4.4 flat.
I would love. I was about to say
He's
like
such a long strider.
I was about to say low 4.4s, but the issue with the 40 for me is always like the training for it.
Sure.
You know, like just getting down in the stance, and he is a bigger dude, like a longer dude. So can you get comfortable getting in the stance to actually make the most out of those first 10 yards? Because I do agree, he's a long strider, he's a bigger guy. To be safe, I'll say I'll say high 4.4s, but I think when you get him in stride, he's a 4.4 flat kind of a player.
There's enough quick twitch that I don't think he's dead over the first 10 yards either. So I think he should be alive, after 10, and then once that stride hits, just takes off.
Hopefully, would love to see it.
I could see 4.4.
Would love to see it.
All right, catch point.
SMU's Rashee Rice. Rice has been pretty dominant, especially in the red zone over the last couple of years. This year, he took his game to another level. This dude, it just loves to be physical with you, straight up. People will play press coverage on him, and he welcomes it. He loves the contact window. He loves he loves dictating the contact coming off the line of scrimmage. He'll run a lot of go routes up the sideline, a lot of comeback stuff. A lot of it is very like sideline work, Mike Williams-esque, where he is not going to create a lot of separation for you, but SMU continually was just like, I'm going to bet on my guy versus their guy, and he always seemed to come down with it. He felt like a bully in that regard, where he was just going up against corners that did not have the strength level to go up against him, and I felt like I thought the contested catch percentage would, and this is maybe a little unfair to him. You mentioned a contested catch percentage that you like to see is like anything above 50%. I believe he had 16 contested catches on 33 contested catch opportunities. So it's a little less than 50%, but it's right there at that 50% number. So he is somebody who I think dominates at the catch point with strength. So he's the guy that I had to pick there.
Okay, last one, and then we'll run through them all. I think we have a little graphic. Yards after the catch.
Zay Flowers. I think it's got to be Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is one of the only wide receivers, I think, in this class that brings you that. If you're looking for any sort of Deebo Samuel type ability, that's this guy. I think he is a really great separator, especially when you get him into the open field. If you allow him to run mesh concepts, if you get him with like deep over routes, like if you get him the ball even behind the line of scrimmage, some wide receiver screens, this guy can really hurt you. I think he's one of the best separators in this class. Now, I think there are better, maybe cleaner route runners, but when it comes to the athletic ability of separation, I feel like Zay Flowers is one of the best, if not the best, in this class at that. So he can definitely improve how clean his route running is, how he sets cornerbacks up to get them to open up their hips one way, and then he puts his foot in the ground and boom, turns the other way, things like that. But I think that can certainly come in the NFL. What I love about him is he already has the athletic ability to be a yards after catch guy.
All right, so there we go. We've built the perfect NFL wide receiver prospect from this draft class. Now let's talk about what the dream scenario is for each team currently picking in the top 10.
Ooh, okay.
So it's got to start with Chicago. We talked about this a little bit last week with Mike. Me and Steve talked about it a bit. What is your dream scenario for the Chicago Bears, given that they start with the number 1 overall pick?
I think the dream scenario for the Chicago Bears is Indianapolis gives you 3 first-round picks to go from 1 to 4, or like whatever it is.
Right.
That's the dream.
My only stipulation for any trade haul is that one of the first-round picks has to be next year.
Yeah,
I want 2 first-round picks next year, just in case.
Oh, 100%.
The Fields thing doesn't work.
Yeah, and Ballard doesn't seem to be like a guy who's going to give up 3 first-round picks, especially to move from 4 to 1. So I think that what ends up happening is you get a 1 this year, you get 4 this year, you get a first-round pick next year, and maybe you get, a day 2 pick 3 years from now. Or
I think a lot of that, though, depends on just how frustrated Jim Irsay is.
And I think that Jim, not only does that go into it, but also I think there are a lot of other teams that would consider moving up to number 1, right? Number 1's going to be for sale for the Houston Texans at 2, the Indianapolis Colts at 4, the Vegas Raiders at 7, perhaps Atlanta at 8, probably not though, Carolina at 9, Tennessee at 11, New York Jets at 13, Washington Commanders at 16. All of those teams will call the Chicago Bears about potentially moving up to number 1. But I think their dream scenario is you don't want to go too far down because you still want to get Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, but getting some extra first-round picks and moving down. That's
I think 4 is absolutely probably the dream scenario, particularly if you can get that first-round pick next year.
But Ballard's going to know that too.
Yes.
And he's going to use that as leverage against them. I
also wonder, though, like just how good the scenario for them is. Like how good would the package be just to move down that one spot? Just from Houston, like particularly when you factor in the fact that Houston screwed that up by winning a random game at the end of the year. Like what could Chicago get simply from moving down one spot to draft a player that we're going to draft at 1 anyway? That theoretically could be a dream scenario as well.
I just love that Chicago has the number 1 overall pick because it gives us some great conversations over the next couple of months.
So that brings us to Houston. After shooting themselves in the foot, what is their dream scenario?
Dream scenario is... I mean, the dream scenario is Chicago stays at number 1 and takes a defensive player, and then they get Bryce Young at number 2 overall. It's so funny. We did so many mock drafts for Houston throughout the season, and it was just Bryce Young in all of them. And now they win a pointless game at the end of the season, and now they might not have that chance. So I just think it's a quarterback one way or the other. You'd love for it to be Bryce Young, but if it's not Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, whoever it's going to be at 2, you just have to get a young quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, the sequence of optimal scenarios for them is number 1, the Bears are stuck at 1, they pick a player that isn't a quarterback, and you get the guy you were going to draft at number 1 overall anyway.
Right.
And the fact that you won the game doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
Number 2, somebody moves to number 1 and they draft a quarterback that you weren't going to take. So maybe the Colts love Will Levis and they can move all the way to number 1. And
that is the dream.
Jim Irsay wanders out there, stamps his flag in the ground, and he's drafting Will Levis. And then you get Bryce Young. And then number 3 is probably you trade and make sure you get your guy. I think that's probably better than not getting him if you believe he's the guy, Bryce Young. I think that's probably ahead in my sequence of scenarios.
For Houston?
For Houston. Like it's probably better to trade to number 1 and get Bryce Young versus sit there, let somebody else do it, and then you pick number 2 in your board.
If you're Houston, like you said, it's annoying that you would have to trade up to number 1. But if you like Bryce Young more than any other quarterback in this class and it's not even close, pay the price, whatever it costs. Like you won the game, you can't change that.
Right.
Don't compile a negative with more negatives and end up not getting the quarterback that you think is going to absolutely change the future.
All right, number 3, Arizona. This is difficult because they're in such a state of flux overall right now.
This is another spot where I would trade down if I was Arizona.
Okay.
I don't think Arizona is anywhere close to competing. J.J. Watt was the best player on that defensive line. J.J. Watt is gone. The rest of that defense needs a ton of work. I think the secondary already needs a ton of work. They need work at the linebacker level too, even though they drafted a linebacker over the last couple of drafts. The offensive line desperately needs work. They're talking about trading DeAndre Hopkins. Kyler Murray's going to miss basically all of next year as well. So if I'm Arizona, you need help in both trenches. Could you draft a trench player at 3? Sure. You could draft yourself Will Anderson at number 3 and be happy with it, or Jalen Carter if you wanted to. But I think the most advantageous move for Arizona is knowing that if quarterback goes 1 and 2, and if the only other one in the conversation that a lot of people like is whoever's left between Will Levis and CJ Stroud, you then also have bargaining power with any of those other teams you could trade down to. So, for example, I look at Carolina, right? If Carolina gets outbid for number 1 overall, if Chicago doesn't want to move all the way down to 9, and Indianapolis goes up to get their quarterback, Houston then takes their quarterback at 2, brother, Carolina needs a quarterback. They can't sit at 9. They just can't sit there at 9, especially knowing that Vegas is sitting at 7.
Yeah.
Right? And especially, knowing that you've got Seattle and Detroit, maybe. They're teams that are willing to move. They have a ton of flexibility because they have extra first-round picks too. So if you're Carolina, then Arizona might be in a spot where they go, all right, we'll trade down to 9. We'll draft what OT won in this class at 9. We'll draft, a Miles Murphy, at Tyree Wilson, or whoever it is at 9. They just need to get better in the trenches. And I don't think they have to do it at 3. I mean, for as good as I think Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are, this Arizona Cardinals team is nowhere close to a Jalen Carter or Will Anderson away from being good. I think they're a long ways away from being good, actually. So I would tell you the dream scenario for Arizona is trade down to 9, get some extra draft capital next year, and continue to build that roster the way they need to.
I mean, I think the single biggest thing is that Murray's hurt. Like, you're not talking about a team where even with everything they've got going wrong for them right now, they would have Kyler Murray starting week 1 and everything would look great, 100% healthy. Like, they're a team staring into next year where they might not have Kyler Murray healthy for most of the year, if not all of it. Like, that's a tough spot to be in. Indianapolis, number 4.
I mean, the dream scenario for them is that it doesn't cost them too much to move up to number 1. I don't really know I don't know if they can live in a world where they just like sit back at number 4 and just take whoever's
That's
left.
Probably too dream, right? Like
right.
It's too much of a dream that they can. Well,
the dream is Bryce Young. That's the answer to the question.
Well, so the dream is either Bryce Young, but maybe the real dream is that they actually think somebody's better than Bryce Young, and then it's possible to draft him at 4. Like, if you happen to believe that either Stroud or Levis either is better right now or has a higher ceiling.
See, but there's no, to me, and we're getting into kind of like what you said there, we're like, that's almost like too much of the dream.
Right.
Like, to me, there's no way 3 picks go by and Bryce Young doesn't get chosen.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So if you believe that either Levis or Stroud, either right now or in the future, is the better player over Bryce Young, you can sit at 4,
yes,
let somebody draft Bryce Young, and then all you got to do is get by 2 more picks before your guy comes up.
The dream scenario for the Indianapolis Colts is drafting your ideal quarterback, whoever it is, for the cheapest price.
Right.
Whether that is Bryce Young and you got to move up to 1 and just hoping it doesn't cost you literally your entire next 2 years drafts, or whether it's sitting at number 4, only having to use 1 draft pick on the guy who might be QB2 in this class, might be QB3 in this class, but that you actually think that is the best.
So
there's just so many different avenues that Indianapolis.
Just playing the either-or scenario, if they have to give up, let's say, 3 first-round picks to move to number 1 to get Bryce Young, Bryce Young plus 3 first-round picks, or C.J. Stroud or Will Levis without moving.
I mean, I think Bryce is the best,
right,
by far.
But that's not the question.
So,
but like 3 first-round picks.
But that's the thing, is that I am not a proponent of bargain bin shopping at quarterback. If you have a quarterback that you think is better and you have a chance to go get him, go get him. That's how I view it.
Yeah, but at some point the price is relevant, right? Like
no. I'm not saying that the price is irrelevant, but like, you have to do it if you're Indianapolis at this point. What are you doing if not? Because if you sit at 4, what if you sit at 4 and you go, okay, well, we like Bryce Young clearly the most, but like we also like Will Levis. Okay, well, what if Will Levis is gone? Are you just taking C.J. Stroud? So you're taking a guy that, like, yeah, okay, we liked him. How much does that change what you do in the future?
But if Young goes 1, you probably only have to get by 1 pick, because essentially, like, either
I don't know if that's the case.
Well, either Houston or somebody else drafting to 1 is taking.
I think Carolina's. Well, go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
At which point, like, one of your picks is probably Chicago, who aren't going to take the quarterback. The other one is Arizona, so you're relying on somebody trading out of that to draft the one other quarterback ahead of you. Like, if Bryce Young goes number 1, I would say there's a pretty good chance that the next quarterback makes it to Indy.
So in this scenario, I think that Carolina would probably be the one to get up to 1. So because Carolina, I think, is going to be very desperate. I think Carolina is going to want to be really aggressive for a quarterback. I think they're sick of it. I think they're sick of the quarterback carousel. I don't think they're going to want a veteran. I think they're going to want to invest in somebody. So in that scenario, I think it's probably Carolina that's moving up to 1. Quarterback goes 1. Quarterback goes 2. And then if you're okay rolling the dice and thinking that Arizona's not going to move, which maybe they're not, that's all the intel that you do. You try to figure it out. Like, right. Perhaps Arizona's not even thinking about that. Perhaps Arizona's like, oh, we need a defensive player. Will Anderson's on the board. He's an unbelievable defensive player. We'll take Will Anderson at 3. I mean, then are you okay with that at 4? Maybe. But again, it goes back to just what I said. I'm not in the. You don't want to overpay. You don't want to get over aggressive. You don't want to burn yourself too hard. But when you're in a situation where you need a quarterback and you need a quarterback badly, and you clearly have one that you like more than another in a class, I'm not about sitting back. I'm just not.
Seattle, number 5.
Seattle can go a couple of different directions. I think that they definitely need help on defense. They need a second corner opposite Tariq Woolen. You can kick Kobe Bryant inside if that's the case. But I think the biggest need for them, especially with their first pick here in the first round, is defensive line. They need help at basically every defensive spot. Uchenna Nwosu was great. They drafted Boye Mafe last year, but they might want a more heavy-handed 5-tech edge player, less of a speed guy. So like a Miles Murphy, maybe somebody that you look into. A Will Anderson could obviously potentially be available, even though he's a lighter guy. Jalen Carter, I think, would be absolutely perfect for them. But I think it's something along the defensive line. I think one of Will Anderson or Jalen Carter making it to 5 is the dream scenario for them.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like Jalen Carter falling this far and Seattle getting him would be
silly,
as good as it can get for them. Detroit, number 6.
Kind of the same thing with Detroit. If it's a quarterback frenzy above them, we get 3 quarterbacks off the board. You're probably still not getting Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. Maybe there's a chance one of them's left, but I'm trying to think of like dream scenario.
Well, first of all, are you in the quarterback market?
I guess I think you are. Maybe the dream scenario is like CJ Stroud. Because Bryce at 6 is, I mean, there's no reason to talk about it. We don't need to talk about it. And then, like, is Will Levis or CJ Stroud like a dream scenario for you? Not over Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. Well, they don't really, I don't want to say they don't need Will Anderson anymore, but don't want any James Houston slander here on this show, so I won't do that. The dream is Jalen Carter. But I think if one of the top 3 quarterbacks do fall, you probably think about it if you're Detroit.
I mean,
I think you think about
if CJ Stroud is there when Detroit is picking, that's very hard to turn down because you have Jared Goff.
Right.
I mean, I know, look, there's a lot of people.
And another year, Ben Johnson, too.
That are really enamored with Jared Goff.
Yeah.
I just,
Jared Goff had more turnover-worthy plays than he had big-time throws this year.
Yeah. I mean, Jared Goff was Jared Goff.
I think it was like 24 and 15 ratio. I mean, it wasn't good.
I mean, there's a reason Ben Johnson was one of the most coveted offensive minds in the offseason.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because Jared Goff is the best quarterback in the NFL. It was because, hey, look, he took this guy that was literally used as a make weight to get Matthew Stafford. Like, we got rid of this guy. We took on board this guy's contract to be able to get this trade done for Matthew Stafford. That is the value that Jared Goff had at that point, and he turned this guy into somebody who had pretty good numbers and everyone thinks played well.
Corner is also a sneaky pick that I like here, but I don't think that's the dream. That's just a strategy. I don't think that's the dream.
Nobody dreams of a corner in the top. Anyway, number 7.
Detroit did when they took Okudah.
The Vegas Raiders.
Didn't go well.
True.
Quarterback. Any quarterback making it to him.
Any quarterback.
Will Levis, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, somebody making it to him at 7. That's what I think is the dream for them.
See, I joked about this before, but like if you go back in time to the Denver Josh McDaniels era, at the point, so there's a few steps in this process, but somewhere along the road is alienating your starting quarterback and getting rid of him, right? Mm-hmm. That's already happening with Derek Carr.
Right. Then
a few months' time, the next move is to find Tim Tebow in the first round. So if that holds, who are we drafting at number 7? Who's Tim Tebow?
Oh, just pick another Florida quarterback. Just pick Anthony Richardson.
Another Florida quarterback turned future tight end.
Whoa!
Look. It isn't me. Look at Florida's quarterback history. There's quite a lot of future tight ends there.
Hey man,
that's all I'm saying.
Jacoby Brissett's doing great.
They've had quite a lot of quarterbacks turned tight ends.
They've had 2.
No, there's like 5 or 6.
Okay, wait. Okay, so Tebow counts?
Yes.
Okay, so Tebow, Felipe Franks.
Yeah.
Burton.
Yep.
Trent Burton.
Yeah, we have to count Driscoll because he's had like
Driscoll played quarterback this past year. I'm not counting him as a tight end.
But only because like they had Davis Mills.
I'm not counting that as a tight end. We've got 3.
He became like this gimmick athlete thing.
We've got
He wasn't
three.
the quarterback. He became, like, they moved him back there when they were trying to lose games again.
We got 3.
I think there's more. Steve, look, the Florida guy isn't here. I don't have the kind of encyclopedic knowledge he has of the program.
Neither do I, apparently.
Okay, so they're not drafting Tim Tebow in the first, is what you're saying?
No,
okay.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
So what is Josh McDaniel's dream here?
CJ Stroud. I think it would be a great dream for them. I think he could work really well with CJ Stroud.
What do you think McDaniel's ideal quarterback looks like? Because the Tim Tebow joking aside, that was the guy that he zeroed in as. He's the future.
Yeah, I think he looks for
Jordan Reed.
That's
another one.
Big, tall. Yeah, but Reed played tight end in Florida.
Also a quarterback.
Barely
Gimmick.
Yeah, okay. I think McDaniel's type is bigger, taller quarterback, experienced. You're probably around 45 years old. Used to play for the Patriots. Wears number 12. I think those are the attributes that McDaniels looks for in a quarterback.
Does the Tebow thing lead you to suspect that, like, the thing that McDaniels values more than anything else at the quarterback position is that, like, leadership, galvanizing, you rally everybody around you quality? Like, the actual playing quarterback part is almost secondary. Like, I need a leader first and foremost.
Well, I think a lot of I don't want to necessarily say that, like, GMs and head coaches fall for that, but, like...
Sure. I mean, it's important. Nobody dismisses it as a thing, generally, right?
Like, I think that was a huge part of Jalen Hurts' scouting report, right? Where you take a chance on this guy is not only because of his ability, but also because of, like, who he is. And that has kind of come to the forefront of, like, now that Jalen is the starting quarterback of the Eagles, that's a major selling point that everybody talks about. Like, this dude is just an unbelievable worker. He's an incredible leader. And, like, those are the things that... I feel what keeps general managers and head coaches awake at night is not the fact that they couldn't evaluate how talented a player was in the game of football, athletically, whatever it was. What keeps general managers and head coaches up at night is evaluating people. Like, it's evaluating the person. That is the toughest part of scouting when you were investing in these guys. And so knowing that is such a big emphasis of what could make or break some of the most talented players that come through the draft pool, it's easy to look at the failures of, like, say, overdrafting Tim Tebow, and you go, like, what are you doing? It's crazy. But it is an avenue for you to understand why they do it, because they want to make sure they hit on that part, and then they can teach you the football stuff. They can't teach you how to be a leader. You have to do that.
Yeah, they're far more terrified of missing on Tim Tebow the other way than the way that he actually missed, right? Like, if drafting someone who's widely talked about as being, like, the best leader in the history of the world, drafting that and the guy not working out, okay, fine, we can live with that. Didn't work out, fine, but we drafted a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
But not drafting him and then him actually working out, knowing that he was this incredible guy that everybody loved and was a leader and would drag his team to the brink and, overcome everything.
Right.
That's what haunts them. Like, we don't want to not draft the incredible leader that was obviously an amazing leader because we didn't think he could play well enough.
Yeah.
And then it turns out he could. Now we look like morons.
Right.
That, I think, is way more haunting to these guys.
Yeah.
All right. So Vegas, dream scenario. Quarterback.
Yeah.
Whoever. So, dream scenario, quarterback at 7, or they go home?
Yeah, I mean, the dream scenario is that you don't have to move and you get to stay at 7.
Right.
Now, there is a reality that exists where maybe the quarterback class doesn't go as hot off the board as we thought. So there is a realistic chance that I think that could possibly happen. Or, you're sitting here and we've talked a lot about Bryce Young and Will Anderson, and I'm an idiot. Bryce Young, Will Levis, and CJ Stroud. Said so many names already. Maybe Anthony Richardson at 7. Like, maybe he's the guy that you think that you could invest in at number 7 overall. I think it's pretty high, but I do think that the league's going to draft Anthony Richardson decently high.
An athletic Florida quarterback, huh?
Yeah. Now you can take the Darren Waller spot, I guess.
All right. Number 8, Atlanta.
Dream scenario for Atlanta.
I mean, they're another team that needs defense everywhere.
Yeah, they are. And there's a lot of avenues that I think Atlanta could be happy with. If you draft any sort of edge pass rusher, that's going to be good in this class. I love Jared Verse going to Atlanta. He's not in this draft class anymore. He went back to Florida State. I thought that he was going to be a first-round pick for sure. So I thought about him potentially at number 8. The dream is obviously Will Anderson, but unless you're trading out, like unless Atlanta wanted to pop up to 3 with Arizona.
Yeah. That's starting to feel very unlikely.
And it's starting to feel unlikely because you are going to be bidding against teams that are going to be drafting quarterbacks. And that's a really bad place to be. You don't want to be a team who's looking to move up to number 3 to draft a non-quarterback because you're going to pay the price to outbid teams that are trying to go.
It's just not worth it at that point.
So you don't want to do that. But any type of edge rusher, a Miles Murphy, a Tyree Wilson, those are guys who have been in this conversation. Number 8 overall is rich for me for both Miles Murphy and Tyree Wilson, but perhaps that could be a spot there where they end up going edge pass rusher. Brian Brzee, a defensive lineman who I like, who's an uber athletic big guy, who he could be a target for them there. I also like corner. I really do. Like if they take CB1 off the board to play opposite AJ Terrell, like that all of a sudden really boosts what the secondary could be. And you go with a guy like Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon. Those are my top 2 corners in this draft that I like a lot. I think this is the starting point in the range for when you could see those guys go off the board. So I'm not sure exactly which one the dream would be for Atlanta, but there's a lot of different options where they could come away and be happy.
Brzee and Murphy both out of that Clemson defense, and Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech.
Yes.
Right? Okay, where are we? Number 9.
8 or 9.
Carolina. We already talked. I mean, you were pitching them for number 1 overall.
Yeah, I mean, the dream scenario is either you can get a price for number 1 overall that isn't too egregious, and you go up and you can get yourself Bryce Young. You can move up to number 3 and potentially take a quarterback that way. I mean, the dream scenario is staying at 9, drafting, let's say, Anthony Richardson, and he fully pans out. Like, that's obviously the dream.
I mean,
might be too much of a stretch, but that's why I put the other scenarios out there too.
I will say, obviously, Carolina has not been tremendously well run in the last couple of years, which is why people got fired. But I think there's something to be said for the discipline they had to not do something crazy last year and draft like Malik Willis in the first round, right? Because they needed a quarterback. It's like, no, we're going to take Icky in the top 10. Where are they? 6. We're going to have the discipline to wait out the quarterback thing, even though we have no picks, so like the next 100. Okay,
we got Matt Corral out of it.
Right. You end up getting Matt Corral. It doesn't work out. He gets hurt. Like, a lot of things didn't work out, but you're sort of seeing now that you then take another sort of swing at Baker Mayfield, which again, I thought was good process that didn't work out at all. Like, just came up snake eyes. I thought the Matt Corral thing was good process. Looks so far to have come up snake eyes because he got hurt and we haven't seen anything from him. But all of a sudden you're back now with the number 9 overall pick and with a shot of doing whatever you need to do to get a quarterback. Like, they, through, I think, good process and being disciplined, could feasibly emerge from this draft with a Bryce Young. Whereas the alternative, like, they could easily have gone, we need a quarterback now, desperately, draft Malik Willis at 6. Like, that would not, a year ago, that was not outside of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and, you know, I think intel goes a long way into that, right? Like, you've got to trust your front office, your scouting staff to not only evaluate players, but like also know what the rest of the league is doing. You know, because the rest of the league, every single team, they're doing these mock draft simulations. They're doing a lot of what could be, who's going to be left on the board, when can we wait on a guy, and you always try to hit the sweet spot of like going up to make sure we get our guy, but not overpaying too much. So I do agree with you. They could have been in a position where, let's even say Kenny Pickett, right? Kenny Pickett goes off the board as the QB1 last year. He goes to the Steelers much later in the draft, but they could have taken Kenny Pickett at 6 or whatever it was in the top 10, and they didn't do that. I just think that they probably had some good intel as well to where they probably wanted a quarterback, but they realized that taking one at 6 was going to be egregious. So, sure, I guess kudos for some self-control there, but the dream scenario for Carolina is you're coming away with a quarterback that you are really happy with, that you think is going to turn the franchise around. I don't know who that's going to be for them. Certainly Bryce Young would be at the top of my list. You'd have to pay a pretty penny up to number 1 overall to go get him. But if you're okay with a CJ Stroud, if you're okay with the Will Levis, you know, CJ Stroud's not going to be this home run pick. We talk about not every team liking Bryce Young. Not every team's going to love CJ Stroud, because for as much as he really helped his scouting report in that final game against Georgia because of how well he played out of structure and under pressure, the rest of his tape this year under pressure was bad. I mean, he I think had a 39.5 passing grade under pressure this year. Terrible. And think of who Ohio State is playing. Nobody's outside of Michigan. And he was awful under pressure. We thought he was bad under pressure last year as a sophomore, and I think his grade under pressure was like 60.3 last year. And it dropped all the way down into the 30s this year. Terrible. But against Georgia, the best defense that he faced, the biggest moment, the brightest lights, he had an 82.9 grade under pressure. That was the best game that anybody had seen from him, and it's the final game that we saw from him. But all that to say, some teams are going to look at that last game and be like, see?
Right.
I told you. Look how good he can be under pressure. And other teams are going to be like, it's one game. So there's no guarantee that he also could go, he's like a lock for the top 3. He could maybe slide a little bit, and if he does, maybe that's the dream scenario for Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, I think, honestly, you paint a good picture of their dream being coming out of this draft with Bryce Young. Okay, it's going to be expensive, but that's even attainable is, I think, fairly dream world for Carolina to be able to come out of that draft with what is the best quarterback prospect in this draft and on your way to somewhere. Last team in the top 10, Philadelphia. I mean, is the fact that they're picking in the top 10 dream enough?
Yeah.
They're in the NFC Championship game and they have a top 10 draft pick.
I mean, just they could win the Super Bowl and have a top 10 draft pick. It is absolutely wild. And there's not a lot of weaknesses for this team, right? It kind of depends what their offseason is going to look like. It kind of depends who they're going to lose. James Bradbury is playing unbelievable for them, so I feel like if they can bring him back, they probably will, because they probably think they're in a long-term Super Bowl window. But if they don't bring back James Bradbury, Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon, getting CB1 in this class at number 10 would be incredible. I would love to see Devon Witherspoon in this Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think that would be a ton of fun. I think that could be a dream scenario for them. And maybe an interior pass rusher, like if Brian Brzee happens to make it to number 10, you put the athleticism of Brzee next to the uniqueness of Jordan Davis, and all of a sudden, like, that's a pretty nasty interior defensive line. That is just some unique size, strength, speed, ability from both of those players.
That's a very Philadelphia move as well.
And 100%.
It's future-proof that defensive line again.
You know, and I can sit here and say, like, this Philadelphia Eagles team adding Bijan Robinson would also be, like, unfair. But is drafting a running back at 10 a dream? I don't know. Bijan's the best to choose from in this class. He was one of 3 blue chip players that Mike had that we talked about on It's Just Football. He had Will Anderson, he had Jalen Carter, and he had Bijan Robinson as the 3 blue chip prospects in this class. So if you get one of those guys at number 10, is it still worth it, even if it's a running back? Maybe for a team like Philadelphia, but that's probably where I would look, something along the defensive line. Or then if you want to get crazy and throw Bijan Robinson into this, I guess you can.
That would be fascinating.
It would be fun.
Over time, I've become a lot less entrenched against drafting running backs high versus paying them. Like, I actually think because of the rookie contract scale, even the most egregious running back contracts in the draft are not that bad. Like, the thing that you really don't want is the Zeke Elliott contract.
No, just absolutely debilitating.
That's the worst thing you can do when it comes to running back value.
Yeah.
Okay, spending a first-round pick on a running back generally, don't like it because of what you potentially pass up with that first-round pick. But, like, you know, what the Jets did with Breece Hall, I don't really have a problem with that at all. And if a guy like Bijan Robinson out of Texas comes along who's being talked about as this, like, Adrian Peterson level prospect, right? I mean, if he's that good, a mid to high first-round draft pick is not terrible value.
Yeah. I would tell you it's closer to like a Christian McCaffrey comp, where what Bijan brings is not only incredible ability as a ball carrier out of the backfield, but also receiving ability.
Right.
He's a really damn good receiver. There are times when Texas would even put him in the slot. You know, I think that McCaffrey was better receiver coming out of Stanford, and especially like now in his NFL career, he's just so seasoned as a pass catcher out of the backfield that like he is ahead of where Bijan is now, but Bijan could get to that point. He's that naturally gifted.
Yeah, I mean, my comp with the Adrian Peterson thing was just the sort of the caliber of prospect.
Sure, yeah.
Not even that, but like how good he's seen as a prospect. Like Adrian Peterson was this absolute can't miss best running back to come along since, you know, whoever, you know, and had been like since his high school days. Like that was a guy who was being talked about as he could have gone straight from high school to the NFL. we have to wait
right.
to get through this Oklahoma career before we can finally draft the guy in the top 10 somewhere.
Yeah.
So like that's the kind of caliber of prospect we're talking about here. At which point, I think there is a discussion to be had about how early is too early to draft a guy like that, given the opportunity cost and the contract and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's probably higher than certainly a lot of people that have PFF attached to their names would want to admit.
Well, that's the thing, man. Me and Connor Rogers on the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, we do mock drafts all the time, and we'll get to the 20s of mocks, and we'll go like, all right, well, where's Bijan Robinson going to go?
Right.
Even Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network, I think his mock that he put out last week, he had Bijan Robinson going 28th to Buffalo, wherever Buffalo's picking, 28, 29, whatever it is. And I think everybody who makes a Bijan Robinson selection in the late 20s says, well, he's probably going higher than this.
Yeah.
We just don't know where. We don't know what team is going to take a chance on him, but he's just going to be viewed as one of the best prospects in this class.
And also, I think this is probably bad process and some kind of fallacy, but if I'm Philadelphia and I have a second draft pick coming along at 31 or wherever it might end up being, somewhere at the back end of the first round, I'm going to be more inclined to take that risk.
For sure.
It's not even a risk. I mean, I'm more inclined to accept the loss of opportunity because I get another opportunity in 20 more picks.
And that's, wait, are you saying the teams at the back end of the draft?
No, if I'm Philadelphia, I would be more inclined to take a running back at 10,
because you have
knowing that I have a second first rounder coming along than if
Yeah.
I just had the one first rounder.
Yeah.
It's like, this is your guy, you get a running back. Like, well,
Yes.
I also need a defensive tackle. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I'm more inclined to do that knowing that I have another pick, 20 picks coming down the line.
100%. Makes it a lot easier.
And I don't know that that's necessarily smart, but I think that's a psychological thing that will work in his favor for a team like Philadelphia sitting there.
Yep. I agree.
All right.
I do agree.
Those are dream scenarios for the top 10.
There you go.
Trev, appreciate it, sir. You've done a fine Steve impersonation, minus the hair.
I was gonna say, you need to grow out the hair,
And the
and
height.
I need to buff up on my Florida quarterback tight end knowledge,
end,
but I'll be ready next
pathway.
time. I'll be ready.
You also need to grow about a foot, but these are
I'll just pump the chair up.
These are all things we can work on.
Yeah.
For next time.
It's all teachable. I'm a toolsy guy. I got all the tools. Full circle pod there.
Beautiful.
Full circle pod.
Beautiful. That's why you're a pro. That's why you're on 3 podcasts today. For everyone else, thank you for listening. Myself and Steve, I believe, will be back tomorrow on Wednesday. Same time, same channel. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.